Do you have your committee?
Best answer.
Yeah.
Just read them.
Smart guy.
It came to the top.
Taking your job.
What do you got? November 9th, regular meeting of the Annie City Council will come to order. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Basilk? Here. Mr. Winarski?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Mr. Bukovac?
Here.
Mr. Goodell?
Here.
Mr. Van Schuren?
We'll stand for the prayer by, we got to excuse Mr. Kukuka. We have to excuse Mr. Kukuka from tonight's meeting. So,
I'd like
Mr.
to ask that
Winarski.
we do that. Excuse Mr. Kukuka from
Mr. Janik, there's a motion is second on the floor to excuse Mr. Kukuka from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? He is excused. We'll stand for the prayer by Chaplain Silk and remain standing for the pledge of the flag by Sergeant Amherst Bukovac.
Will you bow with me, please? Gracious God, thank you for the privilege of being allowed to meet tonight for this City Council meeting. Thank you for allowing us to live in a country that allows each of us to express our personal views without fear of retribution or bodily harm. Bless all of us here tonight, and now may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move on to item 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held October 26, 2015. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held November 2nd, 2015. Minutes of the Ordinance Committee meeting held November 2nd, 2015.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes.
Mr. Miller.
Second, but I just noticed that we have, for the ordinance meeting, Auditor Kukuka in attendance, and he was not.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
if we can amend that to reflect that change, and I'll second that.
This motion is second on the floor to accept the consent agenda as amended. Any other comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Basilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Schuren?
Yes.
Motion carries. Move on to item 5, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on tonight's agenda. Anyone wishing to speak on anything that is on tonight's agenda? Mr. Miller.
Yes, I'd like to welcome Mr. Gabe Allinger, who's here from his government class. And after talking to him, I just realized that his grandfather delivered me. So it was kind of a nice little discussion we had there. So welcome, Mr. Allinger, Nee Wagner.
We want to hold that against him.
That's right. You probably want to put that back in.
If I could go back in time.
Exactly. Put that back in, it's all right.
Move on to item 6, ordinances and resolutions. First reading, item A.
An ordinance establishing the compensation for the members of the Office of the Director of Law, establishing the compensation authorized to be paid to additional legal counsel retained by the mayor to serve as labor specialist, establishing the compensation authorized to be paid to additional legal counsel retained by the Director of Law to assist in litigation and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bukovac.
I'd like to make a motion to send 6A to its second reading, please.
I know it's emergency clause. Do you know what emergency
I don't want it to go to the second reading. We have no second. Motion dies for lack of a second. Mr. Van Schuren.
Move to suspend council rules so item 6A can be passed on its first reading.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
There's a motion and second on the floor to suspend council rules on item A, so may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Basilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yeah.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
No.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Schuren?
Motion carries 6-1. Mr. Winarski?
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Goodell?
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yeah.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries.
It'll be ordinance O-15-34. I'm sorry, 35.
Item B,
An ordinance establishing the salary and benefits for the full-time mayor's position and repealing all other ordinances and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
Move to suspend council rules so that item 6B may be passed on its first reading.
Ms. Vasil.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend rules on item B, so may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Mr. Bukovac.
Thank you. I believe that the establishment of salaries for the administrative staff and as well as ourselves should be going to a public reading of 3 readings. With the emergency, there still is time to enact this into law before the first of the year. That was the reason for my motion in the last to go to the second reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bukovac. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with Mr. Bukovac as well. I believe that this is a 3 reading, especially for an opportunity for our constituents to have a say in this. Also, I believe that, as was said in committee meeting and stated in committee meeting, that we really need to reconsider how we are handling the mayor's position salary, as well as the members of council, as I will be speaking to that item as well. Just to recap, I believe that our mayor's position is underpaid, and I believe our council position doesn't need a raise. I'd like to see that money moved over to the mayor's office so that we can continue to get that over time up to a competitive salary for a mayor's position throughout the county of Lorraine. With that, that's all I have today. Thank you.
Mr. Van Kuren.
I agree with Mr. Miller. Again, I think it's really important to bring this up a second time, even though we discussed it in committee. I think this is going to come back and bite us in the rear ends. When we're no longer up here, I think 12 years from now, the council is going to look back and wonder what the heck we were doing by not raising the mayor's salary on a faster schedule in order to keep up with inflation. One thing I didn't bring up last time is that I really don't believe anyone of merit would have the opportunity to run for mayor unless they, number one, were retired and had some sort of a retirement or pension coming in. Number two, owned another business where they had income coming in. Or number three, had another member of the family who's working full time. And I think in order to attract the best candidate for the job, we need to raise this the salary on a much quicker time scale. Or as I said, we're going to regret it. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? There's a motion and a second on the floor to take item B to council, or pass item B on the emergency. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
No.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-2.
It's ordinance O-15.
All right, we need a motion to
Oh,
adopt.
that was just suspension.
Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion and second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yeah.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries.
It's ordinance O-15-35.
36 or
It's
35?
35, the previous was 34.
Okay.
Item C,
An ordinance establishing the salary for the Safety Service Director for the years 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bukovac.
Make a motion to send 6C to its second reading, please.
Mr. Miller.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor to send item C to the second reading. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk,
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
No.
Motion carries. Item D,
An ordinance establishing the salaries for the members of council for the years 2016 and 17 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bukovac.
I'd like to make a motion to send 6D to a second reading, please.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion and second on the floor to send item D to the second reading. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
No.
Mr. Miller?
No. I'm sorry, yes, excuse me, strike that, yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
No.
Motion carries 5-2. Item E,
An ordinance establishing the salary for the clerk of council for the years 2016 and 17 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bukovac.
I'd like to make a motion to send 6E to its second reading, please.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
There's a motion and a second on the floor to send item E on to the second reading. Any comments? Ms. Vasil.
I have a procedural question for the law director. If this fails, what happens then? Can we reconsider it or not?
If the motion to send it on the second reading
Yeah.
fails,
Mhm.
well, it fails and you have to reconsider it,
Yeah, we reconsider it.
right? Versus being sent back to committee?
If it fails, then it dies.
No, it
No,
fails.
you can entertain another motion to pass it,
Yeah.
in a different manner.
Okay.
In other words, if this,
I believe the public should.
If it fails in this manner, you can't pass it in this manner, but you can pass it in a different manner. Either,
Do we have a second on that?
yes, Mr. Miller seconded.
So we can reconsider it tonight?
yes, because it's the motion to send it on to the second reading.
Yeah, you can make a motion to
Someone can
pass on emergency.
move to pass it on tonight on, suspend council rules like it did mayor and law director.
Motion and second on the floor to send item E on to the second reading. Any other comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
No.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
No.
Motion carries. Item F,
Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Van Kuren.
Move to send 6F on to second reading.
We can't send 6F
This has
onto
got to
this.
be
This has
passed
got to
tonight.
be
This has got to
passed
go to the
tonight.
Budget Commission.
I made a motion, I think.
Yes, Mr. Van Kuren, you did. Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Mr. Winarski.
I'd like to ask that we suspend council rules and declare this an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion and second on the floor to suspend council rules on item F to send it on. Any other comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
I think we're voting yes, I just want to be clear. We're voting
Yes.
yes to suspend rules so this can be adopted on the first reading,
Yes.
correct? Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Bukovac?
Move to adopt.
Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
Motion and second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Resolution R-15-10.
Item G,
An ordinance amending and restating Amherst Codified Ordinances 1149 signs.
Mr. Goodell.
I think I would like to make a motion to take this to item 6G to the second reading, please.
I think this needs to go back to committee.
No,
It's not ready to go to second.
Strike
reading.
that, and I would like to take item 6G back to committee, please.
Thank you. Mr. Winarski.
I'd like to second that with comment.
Yes, go
And
ahead.
I think there's great wisdom in Mr. Goodell's revised motion, simply because we've just been handed a memo from the building inspector, and it needs consideration. And with that, I offer you my second.
Thank you. Anyone else? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries. That completes item 6. Move on to item 7, ordinances and resolutions, second reading, there are none. Item 8, ordinances and resolutions, third reading, there are none.
No, there's two.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Had a thing over my, didn't see that. Item 8, ordinances and resolution, third reading, item A.
An ordinance to adopt Chapter 192 of the Codified Ordinance of the City of Amherst regarding municipal income tax.
Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Motion carries.
O-15-36.
Item B,
An ordinance to repeal Chapter 197 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Amherst regarding taxpayers' rights.
Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Van Kuren.
Second?
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Motion carries.
O-15-37.
Completes item 8. Move on to item 9, miscellaneous acknowledgement of the public. Mr. Janik.
Just a friendly announcement that Wednesday is Veterans Day, and a public ceremony will be held next to the Arabica parking lot for the newest painting done by Mike Sekwatar to commemorate the Korean War veterans. So all veterans are welcome to attend. The service starts at 11 o'clock a.m. We hope to see you there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Move on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
I have two, Mr. President. I have A-15-54 going to finance. It's an increase appropriations and contracts and professional services for the law director account declaring an emergency. And the second is A-15-55, also for finance reappropriation of various funds as per attached Exhibit A and declaring an emergency, and that's complete.
Thank you. Finance, Ms. Vasil?
Yes, I have two items. A-15-54, increase appropriations in contracts and professional services for law director account and declaring an emergency, and A-15-55, reappropriation of various funds, and that will be per the attached exhibit that we will all receive, and declaring an emergency. And that is complete, and I would like to have the meeting at 7 o'clock next Monday, the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Purcell. Building and Lands, Mr. Winarski?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. Streets, Mr. Buchbeck?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Community Development, Mr. Janik?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Executive, Mr. Goodell?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Ordinance, Mr. Miller?
Yes, Mr. President, one item, ordinance has A-15-43 to take another look at the sign ordinance 1149, and just a note on that, today we had been handed to us, it's the first time I'm seeing this printout as well, this memo from the building department with new updates and changes. Please look those over. If you have any questions for Mr. McCartney, our law director or assistant law director, or myself, please feel free to contact us. I look forward to discussing this again in the ordinance meeting called for 7:05 on November 16th. And that's all I have for ordinance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Miller?
No items at this time, please cancel.
Thank you. Recycle, Mr. Janik?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Technology, Mr. Bukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Van Kuren?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
That completes item 10. Move on to item 11, reports administration.
Mr. Ramsey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to council for its work on the new income tax legislation. I appreciate it. Congratulations to everybody for the recent success. And as far as the report, the October reports have been distributed in a report.
Mr. Costello? The leaf pickup continues. This week we're at the south side of the tracks. To help the process, please rake the leaves as close to the street as you can. That machine can only reach out so far. Try to keep them away from your mailbox and telephone poles. That also helps the process speed up. Thank you. In the report. Mr. Pecora?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
In the report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Van Kuren?
Move to accept the reports of the
Mr.
administration.
Winarski?
I'll second.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the reports of administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Mr. Miller?
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Goodell?
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? We are adjourned at 7:57.
No one was.
What time is it?
11.